All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is the spectator, and not life, that art really mirrors. This quote is taken directly from the preface of Wilde's novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. It is a great example of the aestheticism and decadence movement that was emerging in the Victorian era. But what actually is aestheticism and decadence? We're here to give you an introduction to this movement and how it is reflected in the picture of Dorian Gray. Here you can see some of the extravagance that exemplified the movement, such as the great flowing gowns and the freedom of movement. Have you ever heard of art for art's sake? A modern example of this is selfie culture. Aestheticism is just the Victorian name for this, and it is primarily represented through ideas of physical beauty. This is an example of an aesthetic portrait. Can you see that it is very extravagant and indulgent? Take another look at it next to this photo of Kim Kardashian. Can you see any similarities? Kim Kardashian is a great example of selfie culture, which in turn is a great example of modern day aestheticism. The movement is all about extravagant and excessive fashion. Now have a look at this quick clip on an exhibition at the V&A Museum, where they recreated some of the fashion from the movement that explains this idea clearly.
Fashion played a really key part of the aesthetic movement. It's an art movement which began with painters who were fascinated by the idea of creating an entirely new sort of beauty, and that involved creating the image of models who looked nothing like Victorian womanhood. They were freed from corsetry, they wore wonderful flowing gowns, exquisite colours, the hair free. It's a complete revolution.
This shoot's really unique because when there's a really strong storyline, it makes it much more exciting from my perspective, and the composition of the shots is really important. There's not only, me in a sort of floating dress, there's also these amazing sort of flower displays and sort of setups that creates a real story and an idea and a narrative behind the movement that we're looking at.
As you can see, this is very different from what you would imagine a Victorian lady to look like. This leads on to the concept of decadence that went alongside the aesthetic movement. Have another look at this photo. The indulgence you can see in this image links to the loss of morality associated with decadence, which was very different from the traditional ideas of Victorian morality, as decadence is essentially the loss of morality through overindulgence in pleasure and luxury. Decadence was a prominent theme throughout the picture of Dorian Gray, and can be clearly seen in the following clip of the 2009 film adaptation.
Ah, Harry.
Alan.
Bertie tootling at last, I see. Come along, ladies. Let's sit down here.
How delightful. Hello. Drink up. Won't be long before you're anchored to the perambulator.
I don't think so.
Our friend is to marry.
But we haven't had a chance to win your heart.
Oh, well. Farewell to youth.
No. Does Victoria know you come here?
My dear boy, the one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary.
Well, perhaps I have a stronger conscience.
Conscience is just a polite term for cowardice. No civilized man regrets a pleasure. You see? The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Be searching always for new sensations, Dorian.
Come with this.
Forbid yourself nonsense.
Come.
Empty it too.
Come with me.
One of the key thinkers of the aesthetic movement was Walter Pater, who advocated ideas of self-indulgence and pleasure. He says, "Beauty, like all other qualities presented to human experience, is relative, and the definition of it becomes unmeaning and useless in proportion to its abstractness." This is another example of art and beauty being seen as fickle. These ideas are reflected throughout the picture of Dorian Gray, and examples of this are plentiful. This quote is taken from chapter 7 of the novel and reflects the Victorian views on aestheticism. "Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw through the hollowness, the sham, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played. Tonight, for the first time, I became conscious that the Romeo was hideous and old and painted, that the moonlight in the orchard was false, that the scenery was vulgar, and that the words I had to speak were unreal, were not my words, were not what I wanted to say." This quote is taken from Sybil after her second performance. She acknowledges that her performance is poor because she felt it was superficial, which is ironic as her character is an actress. When looking at this quote, it is important to consider the issues she is highlighting on the lack of meaning in art. In contrast, this quote from chapter 4 exemplifies some of the ideals of the aestheticism movement due to its focus on physical appearance. "Harry, imagine a girl, hardly 17 years of age, with a little flower-like face, a small Greek head with plaited coils of dark brown hair, eyes that were violet wells of passion, lips that were like the petals of a rose. She was the loveliest thing I had ever seen in my life." This is a good example of the aestheticism movement, as in his proclamation of love, Dorian focuses purely on Sybil's physical beauty rather than any of her other qualities. This is probably indicative of the reason why their relationship was unsuccessful, due to his shallow focus on what he could see. The picture of Dorian Gray is considered an important example of the aestheticism and decadence movement within literature. Oscar Wilde finishes his preface by stating, "All art is quite useless." Are there more instances in Dorian Gray where you can see this occurring? Do you think aestheticism and decadence is still prevalent today? If so, what other examples can you think of?